The story of Upbuild began in a monastery. On our quest to understand ourselves more deeply, we recognize that it is our attachment to our egos, our identities, that gets in the way of being our true selves. This podcast will help you understand your ego. It will help you better understand your inner world, the motivations, insecurities, and emotions that affect your every action and relationship. Welcome to Upbuilding the Self.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Upbuilding the Self. I am Michael Sloyer, and I am here with two of my partners and very dear friends at Upbuild, Vipin and Hari Prasada. And today, the three of us are actually on three different continents and three very different time zones. Vipin, you are in London, Hari in New York, and I am in Japan. So hello to you both from across the ponds.
It's good to be together. Good to be together, even in spite of the geographical boundaries.
Yeah, I don't feel them, actually.
I completely agree. So for our topic today, we are going to be talking about this very critical distinction of safe problems versus quality problems. And the reason why this is top of mind right now is because we at Upbuild are embarking on our own Upbuild coaching training program right now. And when I was becoming a coach a bunch of years back, the two of you shared with me a series of audio tapes that you had recorded coming out of a coaching course that Hari, you had taken with one of our Upbuild community members, Dave Parke. And there were many, many gems in those tapes. And I think the one that has stuck with me the most, the one that has been the most memorable, is this idea of safe versus quality problems. So I'm really excited to talk about this with the two of you today and to learn more as we dive deeper.
Just one clarification. When you said audio tapes, it made me feel like we did this in the 80s. Just to clarify, they were audio files.
They were MP3s. That's correct.
But it sounded so much better, audio tapes. I felt so proud.
So Hari, maybe you could get us started by sharing some definitions. What is a safe problem and what is a quality problem?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm really passionate about this subject. In fact, I'm passionate about anything that Dave Parke had trained us on way back in the 80s. 2010s. This is one that's really standout, and it's pretty central, I would say, to everything that we do in coaching. So what are safe problems? What are quality problems? And what is the versus between them? Safe problem is something that we're comfortable speaking about. It's something which is an issue, but it's within our comfort zone. A quality problem is a deeper issue that's uncomfortable to talk about. So the relationship between those is that the comfortable problems are often masking the deeper problems. That is not always the case, but it is very, very frequently what's happening. And we lean on safe problems to get ourselves off the hook from doing the real work. So we tend to speak about what is okay for us to speak about instead of actually pushing ourselves to grow and stretching ourselves in uncharted territory. So that's where we want to find out, hey, is this a safe problem or is this a quality problem?
Super helpful. So what might be a few general examples of safe versus quality problems so we can help illustrate these?
A problem isn't inherently a safe problem or a quality problem. It's actually depending on the relationship that one has with the problem. So we couldn't talk about a set of examples of these are all safe problems and these other problems are all quality problems. The same problem, for one person, it might be a safe problem, and for another, it actually might be a quality problem. Hari, you've given the example often of time management. For some people, maybe I could just work on time management because that might help me move forward. It's not a uncomfortable issue for them. It's not that deep, but it's something that I feel like I can make some progress on. For somebody else, Hari, you can speak about this, but for you yourself, you give the example how time management it's actually a very deep quality problem that you navigate. You've been navigating for years. So maybe you can say something about your relationship with that problem and what makes it a quality problem for you.
The gauge here is vulnerability. How vulnerable do I need to make myself to go there? And for me, time management is extremely vulnerable. It's something which makes me feel so disoriented, so out of sorts, so absolutely helpless against the forces of nature. And I need help on that. I feel a desperate need for help on that. And that has been the case, as you said, for many years. So that's something I've worked on diligently for many, many years. And I've made a lot of progress. I've learned tons. I've done a lot of research, formed habits, done coaching, self-coaching, coaching as a coachee. And it's been very powerful. And yet it's such a quality problem that it continues to make me feel vulnerable and that I need help.
One of the things I've seen in that vulnerability is I've heard you say this feeling like I should be able to manage this by now. And that's vulnerability. Like, is there something that is wrong with me that I can't figure this out? It actually is quite deep in that sense. It goes to your core identity.
Right. And you're saying that fills me with more vulnerability. I was already feeling vulnerable speaking about it. When you express that, I feel it. It's like, ooh, right? And so we have to be on the lookout for that because that's our prime spot for growth. That's the stuff that we're suppressing, avoiding, and need to go into if we want to actually become our best selves.
I hope I haven't wrongly exposed you in this.
Not at all. No, this is all in service and we're on the same page.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so if we go back to the example of time management and how that can, for some people, and actually for probably most people, especially a lot of the people that end up coming to coaching with Upbuild, for those people where time management is a safe problem, what's going on there? What's being masked? And what could be some of the quality problems that the safe problem is covering?
I think there are infinite possibilities there, right? So it's not one thing that can happen is sometimes there's something else that has no relation at all to time management that I am either aware of or unaware of, but I don't want to bring into the coaching session. Well, if I'm unaware of, then I'm not doing it intentionally, but I may be aware of it. And it's just like, that's going to feel quite uncomfortable. So I can focus on time management. So it may be masking something else that has no relation whatsoever to time management. I also think often there's something more deeply rooted within that particular safe problem. So if someone is bringing up time management, but we're focusing on what can you do to manage your time better, there's often deeper issues are related to, we've talked about self-acceptance and who I am as it relates to what does this problem indicate about my identity and how I want to be in the world. And so if we just stay at the surface of solving let's block out time and, how do we manage the specific time management issue you're dealing with right now, it'll keep coming back. So making sure that we're understanding what is really important about this problem and how is it affecting the person behind the doing.
Let me even push this further. Safe problems and quality problems are not binary. There's a spectrum. And so taking time management, the quality problem behind it may be, I don't actually know what I want. So therefore, I don't know how to prioritize my time. But that feels really bad to admit. And then a further quality problem beyond that would be, that's because I don't know my values. And that feels really embarrassing because I'm a values-driven person. I have to be. We're supposed to be. It's good. I'm a good person. I have values, but I don't actually really know what I stand for or what I would fight for. And then a further quality problem at the deepest end, you could say, is it's because I don't know who I am.
I don't know who I am. If I know that I'm working on safe problems, what are some questions that I might ask myself in order to help me figure out what are the quality problems underneath that?
Two come to mind immediately to me. One is this question of what is important about this to me? Yep. So it's the question that we ask often in coaching about everything. And that will typically get to, what is important? What's underneath that? And what might be underneath that? Just as Hari Prasada did with this time management problem. So I think asking ourselves and being able to answer honestly, what is important about this to me? And then the other question that comes to me is asking yourself, not just what you want to do, but who you want to be. So often it's like, well, what do I want to do here? If I'm having a time management problem, what do I want to do to manage my time better? But I think just asking, who do I want to be? What is the person that I want to be in relation to this problem? And that can also help to see what's underneath the problem.
You've expressed exactly what I would want to share on that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of one more question that we often ask in coaching, which is, if this was cleared up, as our partner Mary likes to say, if we were wildly successful solving this problem, what would you have? What would be different about your life? And all of a sudden we're getting more at the root of what the person is really longing for and what the challenge might be.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think there are lots of signals. What you just said about longing is very helpful. So often we'll ask the question, what do you want to focus on? And what the person shares is really important. They own the agenda of what they want to work on. But then we're also paying attention to what's not being said. What are the emotions and the body language around the conversation? And what is the longing that might be there? And all of those are giving clues to where is the quality problem.
The other route that I would take is, what are you protecting against? So if you ask yourself this question, what am I protecting against? It forces you to take a different lens and to discover things that you would not otherwise. A similar way of expressing it, and sometimes both are helpful, is, what am I afraid of? What am I afraid of? This is getting into the territory of our shadows that we don't like to look at. And the only way that we can become our fullest selves is by shedding light on the dark.
Yeah. And so this concept is very useful in a coaching context. It's also useful for people who don't necessarily have coaches or have these types of formal relationships, because they can do this work on themselves by asking some of these questions that we are speaking about now. And also, if you think about relationships, when there are issues in a relationship between two people or amongst a group of people, maybe it's in an organizational setting, the conflict can often occur on the level of the safe problem, because it's just easier and more comfortable for everyone to talk about. And in those settings as well, it's important that we actually get to the quality problems.
And a lot of time and energy gets expended on safe problems that don't actually move the needle.
Yeah, I mean, a great example of this is among spouses or between spouses, having conflict around tasks that need to be done, household chores. And one of the things that might be underneath there is just feeling a lack of connection. So we're bickering, feels like the wrong word, but over, who's doing more, who's doing enough, the burden, the load on each partner. So we can try to just work on that at that level, but there may be something deeper that's around when we feel a very strong connection with each other. we have a different relationship with this problem, and we actually we feeling that connection, want to serve the other person versus feeling like, hey, that person's not carrying their weight.
And there are two ways that this goes. One is you follow the safe problem, you solve it, you build trust, and you build momentum. And then you get to a slightly deeper safe problem, maybe related, maybe unrelated. And then you keep going like that, deeper and deeper. And that's a very valid way to go. The other way this goes is that you really recognize that you need to know what we're solving for if you want to feel the benefit of doing this self-work or doing coaching. So if you solve for the thing that actually is not impactful, then you're going to be disappointed. So both are possibilities that you solve safe problems. And when I say solve, it's pretty hard to solve problems, honestly. Like usually another one crops up where you realize that it wasn't quite a full solution or comes back later. So using that very loosely, that you feel like, okay, we've addressed this. I've addressed this. I'm satisfied enough at this point in time. So now I go to the next thing. And then I go to the next thing, and I go to the next thing. And that's powerful. Like, we don't want safe problems to be considered taboo. And hey, don't bring me your safe problems, buddy. Sometimes it's really important, and it creates more capacity to go towards the quality. It builds muscle, and it builds trust, and it builds confidence in the process and in my own ability to work on myself. So it's super important not to underplay that side.
Yeah, I really appreciate this point around not casting aside safe problems, that they're actually quite important. But as we're working on them, it can be very helpful to know that those are the safe problems and they're not actually going to the root of it. They're more of a way in to mitigate conflict in the short run and also help us to get to the deeper problems in the long run. Vipin, with the example that you shared of conflict between two spouses around tasks, let's say doing the dishes or the laundry or something like that, and having the deeper conflict or the deeper problem being more about a lack of connection, maybe even a lack of appreciation for one another and not feeling appreciated. And therefore that blame comes out around specific tasks. It can be really helpful to actually set up a schedule and figure out who's going to do the dishes on which day. But it can also be, it's actually necessary for us to be able to name that what we're really longing for is that connection or appreciation from one another.
When that goes from unconscious to conscious, then the motivation to actually fulfill whatever you set up in terms of a new schedule is much stronger. And also, you know why you're doing it. It goes back to this question that you had shared. If we were to clear this up, if we were wildly successful, what would you have? And the reason that question is so important is it anchors the motivation, because you can see a vision for something very different. And then now, I mean, behavioral change is very difficult. We all know this. It's so difficult. When you've hit on the deepest why, that change becomes not easy, but easier. You have more clarity about your intention and more motivation to achieve it.
This is critical. And it's another principle from our man, Dave Parke, that trained us in this, which is that you need leverage. If you're going to make progress, you need leverage. How are you going to get that leverage? Either the rewards on the other side have to be so high that I can taste it and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get the prize, or that's the carrot, or the stick has to be heavy enough that I'm feeling the pain so much I cannot sit still. I cannot remain stagnant here. It's just not possible. If I go another day like this, I will drive myself nuts. And I cannot have that. I'm committed to getting beyond this. And you can use both. There's often a relationship between the two, but typically an emphasis of one or the other more so. And so we need that. We need that leverage. And in marketing, you have to create the pain if you want somebody to buy the product. They have to feel the pain of not having this if you want them to pull the trigger. So in our own self-development, that is absolutely the case. This can't be emphasized enough.
So we've talked about a example in one's own personal development, like the time management. We've talked about an example between spouses. Any organizational examples that come to mind and the distinction between safe versus quality problems?
One example is a client who wanted to discuss how to proceed with an important meeting. And he wanted more clarity about what to say, how to prepare, and what to have happen in the meeting. And that was his goal of the coaching session. And it was a very important meeting, and it was an important agenda for a coaching session. Through the coaching session, it became clear that what he really wants is to be more authentic and relaxed in those settings rather than putting on a show during the meeting and sort of being on stage. And so it's not just about what he wants to do. So how do I do this meeting? But about who he wants to be. And then as we worked on that, it actually allows him the flexibility. If the meeting goes in an unexpected direction, he does not I had this plan. We planned out what I was going to do, but he has a deeper source of who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? And actually allows him the freedom to be more authentic and be more relaxed because he's anchored in who do I want to be in this situation, in this meeting, and just generally in my professional life.
That's very clear. And it relates to what you were sharing before we started recording about the difference between a presenting agenda, which is what we as coaches often receive right off the bat in a coaching session from the client. This is what I want to work on. And then our job can be to listen for what's underneath that. What's the deeper agenda for that presenting agenda?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you do, and then when you come back, we don't abandon that presenting agenda, but as we return to it, you have a different insight about now with that understanding, how do I want to proceed with this meeting? What do I want to say? And what do I want to have happen here? Changes as a result of that exploration of the deeper agenda or the quality problem that might be underneath what was first shared.
If you want to accelerate the path to the quality problem, if you want to get deeper faster, then a really important question is, how much does this weigh on me? And if it's not weighing on me very much, then I need to figure out why that is, why I'm presenting this as the thing that I need to work on, and what does weigh on me deeply. And is there anything that I'm afraid to admit about this that is weighing on me?
This leads right into a personal example I can share from last night, if it would be useful. So, I mean, your words, Hari Prasad, were just it verbalized things that were going on in my head as we were coaching last night. So Hari Prasad and I coach each other every 2 weeks. We have an hour block and we take turns. One time he's coaching me and the next I'll coach him. And in this transition for us to move from New York to London, we haven't actually coached each other in a couple of months. And so I couldn't remember who had coached each other last. And so I asked him, how would he like to coach or would he like me to coach? And he remembered that the last time I had coached him, so it was his turn. And I was open to doing it either way. But part of what was happening in the background was in my transition from New York to London, there were certain practices of mine that had fallen off. And these were practices that Hari Prasad and I had talked about in my coaching sessions. And I felt some shame in coming to our coaching session as like a bad student who hadn't done his homework. And and it was not because he would be punishing in his response, but because I just felt I wasn't living up to my own commitments. And so I had in my mind, if I coach him tonight, then in 2 weeks, by the time he coaches me, maybe I can maybe I can get back on track. And then I thought, okay, but I'm not going to force that. If he's ready and willing to coach me, the next thing that I was doing in my mind was cataloging, okay, well, what else can I get coached on? Because there's plenty of other things that I could use help on. But I realized that this is the thing. This is the thing that I feel, to go back to what Hari Prasada said, I felt vulnerable about, I felt uncomfortable about. It was clear that that's what I needed to get coached on. And so, because it's such an endearing relationship, I was able to kind of share, maybe not all of this, but a bit of this with Hari Prasada. And then even then further within the topic, a safer problem was, how do I get back on track? And we could talk about what things I could put in place to get myself back on track with certain practices that were really important to me. But, it had been enough times that I had gone off and back on, off and on, that I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to get tactical. And the quality problem was, what will inspire me never to get off track again? We actually didn't touch on what I might do. And we came back in the end, and Hari offered me a request or even a challenge for the next 30 days that I can work on. But the entire conversation was really exploring like my identity as it relates to these practices. And, what I was asking for is, this can't just be a nice to have for me. I really want help deepening my relationship with these practices and understanding like what happens, what's at stake for me here. And so there are multiple layers of safe and quality, right? The first was like, I should just avoid this whole topic because it's going to be awkward and uncomfortable for me. And there were many safe problems that I would not say are necessarily safe, but that also have quality to them. But the quality problem that I think I needed in this situation was, this discussion. And then even within that, I could stay at a layer of, hey, help me get back on track, to really understanding the deepest why and trying to shift my behavior permanently. And I've had that experience in coaching sessions, and so we also talked about another analog that I've had where behavior has shifted permanently, and seeing like, how do I get to that place of such deep motivation and inspiration, understanding why this is so important to me, that actually nothing is ever the same after that moment. I'm saying that, and that sounds like a very high bar for a coaching session, but I've experienced that. It's possible.
Beautiful.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for unpacking that. It also it's a beautiful example of how divided we are, that we know deep down that we need something, but we're so divided that we don't allow ourselves the opportunity to pursue that, because what is right before us that has shorter term gains takes precedence. And whatever will validate our identities in the moment is so much easier to go for than the stuff that really makes all the difference and maybe doesn't have the same level of validation attached to it.
Yeah. I think about the example I shared, and how much of not wanting to go there was about, how will you see me and how will I see myself? And so I could avoid that whole question by bringing a different topic into the mix. And so it's huge how we want others to see. We talk about this with our work with the Enneagram, and especially for certain types, see me the way I want to be seen. And that comes in very much into coaching. even in this relationship where it's meant to help me work on myself, and I have so much trust and so much ability to be vulnerable, there's still someone on my shoulder saying, well, like, do you really want to be seen that way? And in a moment, in a snap, it can get me to go in a different direction and protect myself.
Beautiful. Yeah, this work takes courage. There's no question about it. It takes courage. And we may think that we have courage, but that will be tested. How much do we really want to understand ourselves? How much are we really willing to be self-aware and honest and go into these difficult places? Because that's where the greatest gains are. And our best self is waiting for us. It's buried amidst all of the layers of ego and the hunger for validation, but it's waiting for us. When will we get the courage to really stay with it and go there?
And for leaders of organizations, this is also, there's so much analogous takeaways from the example that you shared with an organization. Today, for example, a lot of organizations are struggling with work from home policies, and leaders are talking about, should we work from home? Should we allow people to go back to the office? And there's so many arguments on the surface about what's best here. But at the root of it, I think, is people don't trust each other.
Yes.
People don't trust each other to do the work that they're paid to do. Workers don't feel trusted. They don't trust their bosses. But nobody wants to talk about that, because not only are there individual identities at stake, but if all of a sudden, as the leader of an organization, if I start having a conversation about trust, it means my organization has a trust problem. And I don't want to be associated with that identity. And so easier to just spend a lot of time talking about our work from home policy.
I think there are many things that could be at play there. I think that's one thing that you'll see very prominently that has a big effect and that we're afraid of dealing with for the reasons that you mentioned.
I'm remembering we do a lot of work with trust very directly with organizations and working on gaps in trust and building cultures of trust. And we've had the experience many times where the idea of discussing trust explicitly feels problematic because the assumption is we have a trust problem. And so the request is, can we talk about this in other terms? And so I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of sensitivity around what does this say about our organization? What does this say about our leadership?
And also, are we equipped to handle that? And I think there's a lot of that self-doubt that comes in the way of our ability to deal with quality problems. It's like, well, somebody can help me or I can help myself with a safe problem, but with the quality problems, I don't know how to tackle that. I don't want to tackle that because that feels too big.
One other thing I'm noticing is that sometimes there may be a tendency to I keep bringing up the same thing over and over again. Let me go somewhere else.
Yeah.
This other person must be getting bored with me going back to having the same issue over. And there's some embarrassment that I keep having to work on this. The embarrassment may cause us to, let me just go elsewhere. And often the quality problems we keep coming back. I mean, it can be years and years of work. And there's so many different dimensions of those problems and complexities. I mean, I've been in coaching relationships. I'm thinking of one person in particular where we spent 3 years primarily focusing on, I think, the biggest quality problem that in his life. And he would check with me every few months, like, you must feel like we keep talking about the same thing. And I just try to keep encouraging him. Actually, I think I so appreciate your persistence and your commitment to actually trying to figure out things that are so deeply rooted. And I think once you make your decisions, and I actually believe this now, seeing sort of the post of this situation, they will come from such a deep-rooted, heartfelt, clear-eyed, highly convicted place that you will see the impact of actually sticking with that quality problem for months and months and months.
This is fantastic. So I absolutely see the relationship between duration of time working on something and depth of problem. So when you hit the deepest quality problems, there are no quick fixes. I'm sorry to break the news. It doesn't work like that. Nobody will hold a magic wand and make it go away. It's not possible. That's the stuff that's really going to transform our character over time when we're diligent and when we're committed to ourselves and to actually learning and growing. It never ends. So we want to be working on the same thing, chipping away. They say, right, like dripping water hollows the stone. So that's what we need to be looking for. It's funny because you mentioned at the beginning about time management. I've been working on that since at least 2006, at least, probably earlier, but that's when I was really very consciously beginning. And I continue. It's a mess for me to this day. But wow, is it forcing me to go outside my comfort zone and become a much better version of myself and to become humble. This is really key. Who am I becoming? We keep saying, who am I becoming? I'm becoming humbled by the fact that I can't make this problem go away. And it is changing the quality, not just of the problem, but of my being. It's changing the quality of my being because I have to keep owning things and working on myself and recognizing at the end of the day that I'm not awesome and in charge and in control of everything as I wished that I were and as I used to think that I was. But there's a whole different reality that is staring me in the face. And it changes the way that I interact, not only with myself, but with everybody else. I come from a different place. I come not from a place of look at how great I am, consciously or usually unconsciously. I come from the place of I'm a struggling soul like you, but I want to help. I empathize because I know the pain of what you're going through. I know I'm going through my own pains, and that is the human experience. So I value when somebody is there for me, and I value trying to gain the wisdom from all of this and gain in the character that I'm meant to gain. And I want to offer that to you. That's what I'm most passionate about. So you can see, based on how long a person is willing to work on something or how long the problem is going, how deep of a quality issue it is, and how big are the rewards as a result. That's really what we want to look for. And that does require patience and determination and all kinds of good qualities, humility, which again are going to grow us tremendously. That's really what we're about. It's what we're made of, what we're meant for.
Beautiful. And to anchor some of what you shared at the top of this conversation with what you just shared now, we can know that something is a quality problem if we're experiencing real vulnerability around it. And if it's long enough lasting where we're really struggling and it's hopefully creating that humility in the process.
Yeah. And just be wary when it's like, oh, I think I could solve this within like a couple months. when you have this sense of like, I really want this fix, that's a high likelihood that we're dealing with a safe problem that's going to be very low impact. Not to say that that is always the case. There are certainly many exceptions to that. And if that is the starting point that unlocks things, beautiful. But don't cheat yourself from going towards the things that are really calling you and that are calling you to become who you actually are, as opposed to staying in this inhibited zone of just what's comfortable and safe to talk about.
Excellent. So as we close this conversation, I want to ask two final questions. One is, as coaches, as managers, as friends, how do we nudge other people towards their quality problems if we see them mostly dealing in safe problems? And then the second is, how do we ourselves nudge ourselves towards our quality problems?
I think the answer for both of those is the same. It's leverage. It's just what we talked about, leverage. So in the case of working with somebody else, the question is, how much leverage do I have in the relationship, first of all? Am I the person that is suited to help here? Am I positioned well to help? Does the person want my help? Because if they don't, then it's a useless exercise. And if I do, then it's going to be challenging, but it's going to be exciting, hopefully. Then you can actually start to share your observations of the person in an honest but heartfelt way, empathizing with what you're perceiving and what you can see may be happening beneath the surface, because that's also coming through, and challenging the person. What would happen if we were to go in a different direction? Or asking the questions that we've been talking about today, like, how much does this really weigh on you? How much does this make you feel vulnerable? What would happen if you solve for this? And so for myself, it's a similar thing. I have to ask the same questions and figure out what's the leverage that's going to make me really go deeper. How am I going to find enough pain, enough reward, or both to actually make a shift to what I want to work on and how much I'm willing to give to that?
Thank you, Hari Prasada. I was just going to say that we can use the coaching tool of powerful questions. And when we ask questions that the person may not be asking themselves, nobody else is asking, that makes the person stop and think differently. I mean, this happens often in a coaching relationship where you see someone pause and, the wheels start turning because they haven't actually contemplated that question before. So if in the example of, the meeting that I gave and the person's trying to figure out, what do I say? If I start just with, well, what do you think you should say? What do you want to say? I'm still on that same track of like, okay, I have to figure this out. What do I say? And you're asking me, what's the starting point? But if the question is different, like, for example, what do you want to feel when you walk out of that meeting? Or what do you want the people in the room to feel? So I think it's the process of, instead of telling someone what to do, or instead of staying at the same level of what they're trying to figure out, really exploring and asking a few questions. And that can really help people find the quality problem, find something deeper. And I think the same thing applies to ourselves. Like, we have to ask ourselves, we talked about a simple question of what's important about that. You can ask that. It's like the 5 whys of the Toyota production system. Like, keep asking that question. What's important about that? What's important about that? What's important about that to yourself until you can't find anything else.
Exactly. Yeah. I was just thinking how many times I've gotten in coaching sessions. That's a great question. Exactly to your point, Vipin. And it comes when the person's like, yeah, I should have actually thought about that, and I didn't. And I'm grateful that you're making me think about this.
That's great. Well, thank you guys for this conversation. As always, I really appreciate the time together, your wisdom. And as I think about our relationship and what often happens between us and among us, it's amazing to me how easy it is to work on my own quality problems within our group. They actually feel like safe problems many of the time, just because of how psychologically safe I feel with the team. So I just wanted to say thank you and really appreciate our time together.
That's very touching. I love that. Yeah, it's mutual. I feel that also. I was going to joke that you're not going deep enough, Michael. If it feels safe, you're not going deep enough. But I really appreciate that. And the feeling is mutual. Thank you.
I do too. I was going to say it's mutual, even though I was trying to avoid Hari yesterday.
Well, it took you less than 24 hours to call yourself out for it. So
that's pretty damn good. Yeah. That's amazing. It's such an example.
Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Upbuilding the Self. Upbuild is a leadership development company that offers workshops, coaching, and other services to help you on the path towards being your best self, free from the shackles of the ego. To learn more about our work, visit our website, upbuild.com, and sign up for our newsletter to gain access to podcasts, reflections, and upcoming events. If you enjoyed this episode, please go to iTunes to leave us a review so that others can find and benefit from the podcast. We look forward to being with you again next time.